Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. Was there a need for a divine law? And that's a good question to ask. Because, the picture that we've put out so far, you've got a God. Let's say, just put aside the question of whether God exists or not. Let's just say we're accepting Thomas's views. There is a God. He's, the sort of God that Christians, Jews, Muslims describe him as, created everything out of nothing, structures everything, cares about the creation, that, he's not sort of a capricious God, made things just to break them or anything. He actually cares about what's going on. And he gave human beings reason and certain inclinations so that they could figure things out. Well, then why would you need something else? Why wouldn't the natural law be enough? And he says, well, the natural law isn't enough for a couple reasons. So he says, besides the natural and human law, it was necessary for the directing of human conduct to have a divine law. And this for four reasons. What are these reasons? Well, he says, first, it's by law that human beings are directed how to perform their proper acts in view of their last end. So let's say we put that into more contemporary language. In order to figure out what's going to make you truly happy, you have to do what's right. You have to actually follow, what's going to satisfy your inclinations and attain your ends. Now, remember back to last class. As the sort of creatures that we are for Thomas, is our last end, is our final end, is what's going to make us fully happy something in the world, or not? What did Thomas say? Yeah?
No, because it's God.
Yeah, so any created good, it could be part of happiness, but it's not going to be the whole thing. The natural law will help us to attain happiness here. For instance, the natural law will tell us you need to get along with other people. If you're not actually getting along with other people, you're probably not going to be very happy, right? Even if happiness for you just consists in pleasure, you're probably not going to enjoy a lot of pleasure because people are going to want to take it away from you because you're irritating them, right? So the natural law will help you out with some things. But it won't actually direct you to the ultimate end. So a divine law is needed for that. So that's one reason. The second reason, he says, the uncertainty of human judgment, especially on contingent and particular matters. As we get away from the more general to the more and more particular, we can go wrong a lot easier. And it's not just because we're fallible human beings or something like that. It's because particular things are actually harder to judge. It's really easy to, and think about math classes, right? All of you remember having problems and learning how to do certain things. And what were the kind of problems that always bothered, well, not necessarily all of you, but most of you the most? What were the kind of problems that you didn't like to do? Yeah.
The long division problems.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, that was the one that bothered you the most. I had all sorts of irrational things myself. Like I didn't like, ending up with a negative answer, but that was kind of a weird quirk on my part. What do people complain about in math class, though? And worry about running into on tests? What kind of problems? Yeah.
Fractions.
Wow.
Yeah.
Fractions? Well, I guess fractions are hard to deal with. What is it? Word problems. Yeah. Why do people dread word problems? Yeah.
Because you can interpret what they're asking in so many different ways, depending on how things are worded.
Word problems are sometimes ambiguous, aren't they? They, like you said, they can be interpreted in multiple ways. I suppose fractions and long division, you know, it's possible to get things wrong in it because they're more complicated ideas, right? And that's sort of along these lines. But it's not quite the same thing as things being ambiguous. If your teacher writes word problems badly, you can't figure out how to solve them, can you? And there's certain situations when we get away from the very general and we start getting into the nitty-gritty. Thomas has a great example a little bit later on when in our question 94. He's talking about giving back something in return. This is a classic problem. In general, if somebody gives something to you and says, hold on to this for me, when they ask you for it, you should give them the thing back, right? Like, you know, a weapon, for example. What if they say, I'm going to need my gun back because I want to go in and shoot up my workplace. Should you give them the gun? No. Now, you notice you're sort of going against the general rule that you always ought to return what's given to you, right? So, now, your inclination is right, though, Thomas says. It would be the wrong thing to do. Why? Because there are certain particulars involved, and you have to be able to look at those particulars. So, human law sometimes screws it up, doesn't it? It would be helpful on certain matters, particularly very murky matters, to have some divine help, wouldn't it? To have some sort of, statement from above. Okay, here's what we need to do in this sort of situation. Think about, Thomas doesn't use this example here, but this is a great example. Should you forgive people who harm you? One of the distinctive things that you find in Christian thought is this emphasis on forgiveness. Not every religion preaches that too, by the way, or preaches it to the same extent. And not every moral theory would necessarily go along with that. If you're a utilitarian, there could be some good purpose behind forgiveness. It could serve some general happiness thing, but not necessarily. Maybe it's better to, when people screw up, you come down hard on them. And if they cross you, maybe it's better that you, cause them some pain so they'll, return more pleasure later. The divine law stressed forgiveness over and over and over and over again. Even, by the way, that's not something unique to Christianity. If you look at the Jewish scriptures, before the New Testament, you will find injunctions to forgive. You'll find it even in the Jewish law, but less of an emphasis on it. How would we know that that's really something that the natural law requires of us if something didn't come along to clarify that for us? That's one of the purposes of the divine law, to give a little bit of clarification on these particulars. He says, here's the third one. Human beings can make laws in those matters of which we're competent to judge. Now, what do we actually get to see about another person? Why is it that you might not know people as well as that you think you do? You might be surprised by their good behavior or their bad behavior. Yeah.
But you can't really tell what they're thinking or what they really feel all the time.
Yeah, you can tell a little bit about what they're
But you can't
thinking.
be in their mind.
Yeah. Thomas puts it in terms of you can't know another person's heart, but who can? Again, in this sort of theological schema, God. So Thomas talks about interior dispositions in addition to actions. He says, human beings are not competent to judge of interior movements that are hidden, but only of exterior acts which appear. We get to see the outsides of other people. And you can actually, start to infer some things about them after a while, right? If somebody screws you over each time that you deal with them, or you get into a conversation with them, and every time you're in a conversation they try to one-up you, you can figure out after a while that you don't want to hang out with that person and that there's something wrong inside of them, right? It's not just a bunch of exterior acts. But do you really know what's going on with them? You can't open up their head and look inside and see what's going on, can you? can't peer into their soul. So the divine law, he says, human laws can only look at exterior things. Did you follow the law or didn't you? They can even, if somebody's dumb enough to say, I didn't follow the law because I hate the law, they can, judge some interior things then. But for the most part, they can't. So the divine law comes along, and the divine law, like he says, can tell us about what we need to do in order to have virtue, because it knows human beings a bit better than these do. In part because it's coming sort of from God, in a more direct way than the natural law, which is built into our nature. We use reason to understand. So again, if you think about the example of forgiveness. Aristotle said you should get angry at some times, right? And yeah, you can forgive some people, but if you actually read Aristotle carefully, he'll say, there's a lot of cases where you shouldn't forgive people. As a matter of fact, you're doing the right thing by not forgiving bad people. What does Christianity teach? Yeah, you should even pray for your enemies. Now that's a weird thing to say. You should pray for people who hate you. You should wish them well, even knowing that they're probably going to remain complete bastards, and still try to get you and all that. I mean, it's pretty tough stuff to hear, isn't it? Do you think the natural law would tell you that? Would you, sitting by yourself, in some determinate situation, using the reason that you've been given, come to the conclusion that, yeah, that person is mean to me, but instead of being mean to them, which is what one of my inclinations would be, my natural inclination, right? Somebody's mean to you, don't you want to be mean to them? I know I do. The divine law comes along and says, you should forgive. And not only should you do it this time, you should do it at other times, because that's going to build up the kind of habit within you that'll make you a happier person and a better person. And it may not even change that other person, too. They may continue to do what they do. That's not really your concern. The divine law would come along and help you towards certain kinds of virtues that the natural law by itself wouldn't get you to. The fourth one he says, bless you, human law cannot punish or forbid all evil deeds. Why not? Well, when you try to do away with all evils, you also end up doing away with a lot of goods, too. Human law is kind of a blunt instrument. It's difficult to write laws well so that they'll actually attack what's wrong, what's bad, and not also screw some things up that are good, too. But there are plenty of things that the divine law, over time, did tell people that were wrong, that they didn't seem to be getting. And because the Bible, came to them and people were actually following it, they realized it wasn't good. I'll give you an example, actually, out of St. Anselm that you may find kind of funny. He wrote a king of Ireland while he was Archbishop of Canterbury. So he's a bishop. He's in charge of teaching about the faith, and he's in charge of teaching about the divine law. And archbishops are pretty high up, so they can call kings on the carpet. So he writes to this guy, I think his name is Muirtot, and he tells him, hey, I've heard about something that's going on over there, and you shouldn't be doing it. I know it's a lot of fun for you, but I don't think that you should be doing it. And you're the king, so you should probably make sure that this isn't happening. What he's complaining about, I don't know if this was actually historically the case or not, he says, you guys are swapping your wives. You're trading them out with each other, just like people getting off of one horse and onto another. And that's not right. And then he says to him, here's where the divine law would come in. I mean, the natural law would tell you that's not a good idea too, but sometimes we don't get the natural law. He tells him, if you want to know you're not supposed to do that, you can either read the scriptures or have somebody else read them to you. And that's how he talks to this king. That would be an example of something where the divine law is being very clear about, look, this just can't go. This is something that's bad for you, it's bad for them, it's bad for your subjects. You didn't seem to get it with the natural laws. As a matter of fact, your human law that you're enacting over there in Ireland seems to say this is A-OK. So then the divine law has to come in and clarify things. So Thomas does think that there is a need for a divine law. One thing I do want to point out right before we finish up with this part, these are going to be saying more or less the same thing. This is going to be a bit more specific in certain things. And the natural law can get murky for us because we often tend to be, disordered in our desires and things. We're not, 100% whole and rational all the time. So the divine law, think of it as sort of like a support system for the natural law. But where is Thomas really putting his attention? It's primarily in the natural law. Because if you're functioning well, the things that are being talked about in the Bible, like, think about the Ten Commandments. What are some of the Ten Commandments that have to do with what you ought to do with other people? Yeah, don't murder anybody, right? Well, you didn't, if you didn't get that, if like things weren't working for you right, or your society said, kill anybody you like, so long as they don't matter, then it would be good to have the Bible to come along and say, don't kill anybody, don't murder people. But you could actually just consult the natural law and figure that out, couldn't you? If you're being honest with yourself, your conscience could convict you even if you didn't have some sort of religious authority, because they're telling the same thing. What's another one? Yeah, and adultery. How would we sort of reconceive that now? Don't cheat in relationships. Don't seduce anybody else out of their relationship. And again, do you need the Bible to actually tell you that? I mean, if you do, you're pretty hard up, right? If that's the only reason why you're not going out and sleeping with other people's spouses, then you really do need the divine law. But if you think about it and you think, boy, this is not a smart thing to do. This is actually hurting people. This is damaging relationships. This is not good for me over time. You would be using the natural law. You could figure that out on your own, Thomas thinks. Let's think about one of the other ones. Don't steal. Again, if things were screwed up for you and somebody came up to you and says, look, it says here in the Bible, don't steal. And it doesn't just say it here, it says it in a whole bunch of other places too. And that kept you from stealing, that would be good, right? But could you figure that out on your own? I think you probably could, and Thomas thinks that you could too, because that's part of the natural law as well.